at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. Interesting perspective posted on X from Jeff Kazin. He's the former head of trading for Cargill for Venezuela in that region. He posted this: my Venezuelan experience as head of trading in the region for Cargill. Cargill was and is the leading producer of critical staple ingredients such as flour, pasta, vegetable oil, and rice in Venezuela. I'm not saying I agree with grabbing the dictator, but I did have a front row seat to see the damage a kleptocracy did to innocent people. The warmth of collectivism in detail. Here it is. The government took over our minute rice facility at gunpoint because we were gouging the nation's poor, so they said. The government was never able to run the plant. It never ran again, in fact. It returned years later with no equipment inside. Number two, there are thousands of generals in the army. They are each given a slice of the economy to loot. The large number of generals made it difficult to organize a coup against the regime. Well, that's an interesting insight, right? Diffuse the opposition and, of course, pay them off by any sort of mafia organization, have them running their own racket and feeding up a little bit, but give them their little fiefdom and keep them content. When they serve as effectively a gatekeeper. Number three, the government opened grocery stores and sold staples below the cost we sold them to the government. This is interesting since this has been proposed by BLM Brandon in Chicago, of course by Mamdani in New York. It's been tried in Kansas City. In theory, they use petrol oil money to lower grocery prices. Our regular grocery store outlets were forced out of business. When the government demanded we sell them products below cost, we simply had to shut down. The populace became even more dependent on government handouts. But I'm sure it'll work out for Mamdani. Number four, dollars. We needed dollars to buy raw materials like wheat from places like U.S. and Canada. The government would periodically allocate us some dollars that could only be spent for raw materials and freight. Eventually, only the local companies that can and would pay bribes got dollar allocations. We had several facilities closed for lack of raw material. Number five, observations. My employees liked working for Cargill. The office was an armed compound with access to a gym, high-speed internet, global communications, weekly box of basic staples. Cargill provided a safe and secure environment, if only for the working hours. Employees became very close to others inside the apartment building. Going out on the street with a desperate population was not advisable. I needed wood pallets for feed. We tried to export wood pallets to swap for grain. We refused to pay the bribes it would take to export the pallets. Number eight, I once tried to set up a closed-loop wheat planting to flour mill supply chain. First, they came and stole all the seed wheat for food. When we tried to ship in seed wheat in containers via U.S. donors, there was no way to get it out of the port without it being stolen. Livestock. Our feed business completely collapsed. Even if you could raise a pig, you couldn't defend it from being stolen. People with guns were hungry. Employees. In the end, my highly skilled team, alone with other highly educated people, chose to leave. Cargill often found jobs for them in other Latin countries. The regime was more than happy to see the well-educated leave the country. Setting these employees up with high-quality, stable jobs after fleeing remains one of the best things I ever did in my career. No one remembers millions in trading earnings. This is a short list. In my opinion, the first money spent needs to happen now, and it needs to be food. The U.S. is already on the clock. The current regime does not care if it starves the population. The orgy of theft will accelerate if they believe their days are numbered. Venezuela should be an outstanding customer for U.S.-grown ag products: rice, bread, wheat, vegetable oil, etc. Feed the people first. Jeff Kazin, former head of trading at Cargill. Well, let's begin there with just a little comment on this teachable moment to so many of America's denizens these days. as evidenced by, for example, as I referenced, who occupies mayor's offices in big city America. Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review and author of the forthcoming Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America. And that century opens another chapter this year already, J.D. Vance's house. Noah Rothman, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan. How you doing?
So I mean, before we get into the geopolitics and what comes next and Machado versus Delcy Rodriguez and all these other matters, again, the juxtaposition of Maduro's capture and extradition just a few days after Mamdani's inauguration, and Mamdani just being the latest example of what we see in Chicago and Seattle and Baltimore and so forth. The case against socialism. Maybe we should start there and really focus our attention on this teachable lesson.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a really good illustration because everywhere on the planet Earth, still to this day, more than 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that the countries that languish under socialist dictatorships or quasi-communist dictatorships are desperate to escape them. And those of, the transient class in American metropolitan areas, many of whom are very covetous, very jealous, very status conscious, seem to think that socialism is a pathway to their advancement, not necessarily because it provides them with opportunities. Yeah, free busing is great. The notion that you'll just freeze rents is great. Keep some more money in my pocket. They like that. But what they really seem to believe, if you shot them full of sodium pentothal, is that somebody else has my God-given due, that I have been stripped of what is essentially my right, and it needs to be expropriated from that person or that group of people, more likely, because you have to depersonalize these individuals to talk yourself into it. And get it to me. That's the expropriation philosophy. And it's what we see in the public comments of Mayor Mamdani's initial appointees, many of whom seem to have come from the academic firmament and have never encountered how the real world works. They're very confused by it, which is why I don't have high hopes for the success of this administration. But I do have high hopes that it will prove illustrative of why socialist schema never work out. And, sometimes we need a reminder. Apparently, every 30 years or so, you need a reminder of why collectivism, the word he used, which is not to digress, which is such a reveal, such a tell.
Oh.
It's not like he lacks euphemisms for communitarian,
Right.
like small c, like we all get together and we're all working together.
Community, yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sort of thing. No, collectivism is kommunalka, it's gulags, it's purges, it's collectivized farming and the famines that associate. Like, people who understand what that word means are very triggered by it for good reason. But he wanted them to be. He wants to rehabilitate this philosophy. Good luck to you. We're going to get a good eyeful of what it really looks like.
Yeah, no, he can take the mask off now. He doesn't need to make kitschy TikTok videos. He's in. So let's do it. Let's go. Let's get right to it. And he seems to be doing that. I do like the idea of shooting them all up with sodium pentothal, though. If we could get around some of the constitutional issues, I'm interested to listen. Yeah,
voluntarily, of course, voluntarily.
Yes, of course, voluntarily. So now going to Venezuela and where things stand in terms of the big what comes next question, and some of the confusion around why the Trump administration would go with Delcy Rodriguez rather than, there's a little bit of confusion here too, and this may be part of the explanation. I mean, the guy who had the election stolen from him in 2024, Edmundo Gonzalez, has called himself the commander-in-chief already. Maria Machado apparently is coming back at some point. There's a big belief that if her name was on the ballot and whenever the next election would be, that she would win in a landslide. But yet the Trump administration, at least for now, decided their best path was to stick with a temporarily, at least, compliant Maduro vice president named Delcy Rodriguez. What's your assessment of that?
Yeah, so the public reporting is that was predicated on a CIA assessment.
Yeah.
Mercado, who was invalidated illegally from the ballot. It's not like she was not supposed to be on that ballot. The government invalidated her, and Eduardo Gonzalez stood in her place. The United States has a history of recognizing the legitimate opposition to the government when they win these elections. And the Trump administration 1.0 recognized Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela, and the legislature that was elected as the legitimate legislature. The Maduro government established this parallel legislature in 2017 in order to maintain power. So there's a long history of invalidating legitimate election results by the Maduro regime. And it would behoove us, I think, to at least rhetorically support the aspirations of the Venezuelan people as expressed in ballots. And I mean a lot of them. It's not like these elections were especially competitive. They were very one-sided in favor of the opposition. I don't necessarily know if we should trust the CIA assessment. The CIA is very good at its job, but it's very bad at predicting the future. It has a track record of making assessments that are predicated less necessarily on an assessment on the ground, but of interest in Washington. And we should keep that in mind, not necessarily gainsay the CIA's assessment, but at least be skeptical of it, in part because this regime has not changed its character at all, and it's still largely intact. It's not the Maduro regime. It's the Hugo Chavez regime, which was established in 1999, and Maduro simply was bequeathed by virtue of his position at the time and place of Hugo Chavez's death. It was an accident. And right now, still have the...
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, but it speaks to the Cargill guy talking about thousands of generals. That this infrastructure of the kleptocracy that's built. You just because you took out Maduro doesn't mean any of that goes away. Particularly when his VP is backfilled. The other thing about that CIA assessment, and I get it, and I get some of the concerns they had about Machado's assessments, and they didn't feel like they were getting good information with her. I read the whole New York Times thing, but here's the thing: if you're going to gamble, then you gamble in the direction of your values, it seems to me. And there's a reason Machado won the Nobel Prize. So you gamble on the side of the dissidents of the communist regime. You say, Delcy Rodriguez, not only do you engage with us constructively with respect to the oil embargo we have, but also those 800,000, 2,000 political prisoners, those people get released tomorrow. To the Cargill guy's point, we're bringing in food and we're going to feed the people, and they're going to know it's us feeding the people and not you. I mean, those are the sorts of things I'd like to see as well.
Exactly, and that's all the stuff you say in front of the cameras. And if you have to work out some shady little deals in the backside with this regime that you don't support and that you don't want to see perpetuated, then you do that very quietly. But a regime is not the head of state or government. A regime is the entire schema in which a society organizes itself around. In the United States, the Constitution is our regime. It doesn't change with control of Congress, the transfer of power to one president to the next. In Venezuela, the regime is the Hugo Chavez criminal enterprise, kleptocracy, with some socialist trappings around it. And it's still entirely in place, and it's supported by a variety of power centers, among them Diosdado Cabello, which is a great name. I think it translates roughly to God-given hair, which must be a problem for somebody who has male pattern baldness. But he's in charge of the military, and he's in charge of the military because the militias support him, because the cartels support him. And Delcy Rodriguez, too, has her blood all over her hands for this regime's crimes. And the regime is still dependent on bad actors abroad like Russia, China, Cuba, and Iran for international support and solidarity. The regime itself has not changed its character. I see the president today celebrating this concession of this oil tanker, Venezuelan oil tanker with sour crude on it, to the tune of 30 to 50 billion gallons. We produce that much oil, much better quality, in the United States over the course of 3 days. It is not a big concession.
No, but I mean, as Rubio said over the weekend, one of the things here is to make sure that their dealings with our adversaries in the other hemisphere, China, Russia, Iran, those days are over. And Trump did take action to compel them to expel the Chinese and Russian delegations. I mean, I don't know that that's occurred yet, but he made that public call.
That would be great, but you need much more pressure on it. And to be fair, as we are speaking at this very moment, the United States is exercising simultaneous boardings of Venezuelan oil tankers that escaped the quasi-blockade. One of which was claimed by Moscow, is flagged by Moscow, is in the North Atlantic right now, and is being boarded by U.S. military and Coast Guard. and there's another in the Caribbean that's doing so. This is how you place pressure on the regime. This is how you wrap a noose around its neck and threaten to pull. And that's what we have to do if we were to change the character of this regime, which, by the way, wouldn't necessarily change the nature of this regime. It would just essentially sign us up for Saudi Arabia in the West, a regime with character that we don't necessarily like and we don't support and is increasingly embarrassing and doesn't fulfill the wishes of the people, but is a strategic partner with whom we can work and advance our interests in a very bloodless, realpolitik way.
Well, the other thing, though, too, all of the on-again, off-again detractors of Trump at present, endless wars and quagmires, and he went from a brutal dictator to now he's just a foreign leader. I'm talking about Maduro. Their rhetoric changes based on their interest in the moment, the Duckworths and the Schumers and the Chris Murphys. I mean, they're all pathetic hypocrites. But the other piece of this, too, that's unfair coming from the D.C. press corps, too, speaking of hypocrisy, is the idea because they made this sort of Machiavellian decision, I suppose they would argue, for right now with Delcy Rodriguez, doesn't mean there's some open-ended, even medium-term commitment to her. This is sort of very transactional at this moment, and that transaction, the nature of that transaction, could change in a hurry.
I get it, but why do you have to say that in public? You don't. You really don't. I mean, that's the sort of calculation that you can make in private, and you can even leak on background to reporters and try to explain what you're doing. I mean, that's typically how administrations would behave. It's not something that you have to say in public because it does diminish a values-based foreign policy. And I know there's a lot of hemming and hawing over that. Values are of no use to us. That's simply ignorant. I'm sorry. That's an expression of somebody who doesn't understand how foreign international relations work. The United States has an alliance structure that is very cheap to maintain. You know why? Because it's not predicated on coercion. Our adversaries, the extent that they have reliable alliances, are predicated on very costly arrangements that involve coercion, the dispatch of troops, loan terms that are very favorable, but when you call them in, you have to enforce them in ways that are kind of mafia-esque. And that costs money. All of it costs a lot of money. It makes the cost of doing business just a little bit more hard.
Yeah,
that's
we don't want to. We don't
fighting for ourselves.
We don't want
like trash.
We don't want to do China's Belt and Road approach.
Right. But that's what we're signing ourselves up for with this muscular diplomacy that treats our allies as though they're bigger problems than our adversaries.
What about, before I let you go, some of the other pronouncements Trump has made about, Gustavo Petro better watch his ass, and we got to do something about Mexico because it's controlled by the cartels, not President Sheinbaum, which, I mean, I think is an accurate statement, but the we got to do something is a bit vague and potentially concerning. Do you take that as just saber rattling right now to make sure that some of these other antagonists, or even if they pretend to be, wanting to constructively engage, or not taking the steps necessary to be a real friend, like perhaps Sheinbaum, do you take that to just be making them as nervous as they can possibly be at this point to get greater compliance, or are you thinking that this is a predicate to something Maduro-esque like the last 6 months was to what happened last weekend?
Well, Maduro-esque is a high bar. I don't think that sort of scenario is on the table, in part because the Sheinbaum is not, has not been indicted by a grand jury in the United States.
Not yet.
But yeah, right now it's saber rattling, I would say, sure, but you can't rule anything out. It would be a failure of imagination to rule anything out. This administration, this president, campaigned in 2024 on the prospect of mounting kinetic strikes on drug cartels inside Moscow. He has a predicate to do just that, and I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of the forthcoming book, Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America. Noah, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one. Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
We couldn't decide if we needed in-home care for Dad.
Right. Just some help here and there with bathing, organizing his meds, a walk through the neighborhood.
Oh, exactly. But everywhere